Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. I'm Michelle, and today I'm chatting with Edd and Cynthia Staton, award-winning journalists, authors, and experts on retiring abroad and expat life. Welcome, and thanks for chatting with us today.
It is great to be with you, Michelle.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having us, Michelle.
Oh, we're happy to have you. Let's start at the beginning. Could you tell our listeners about your expat journey and how you settled in Ecuador before and after traveling the world for 2.5 years?
This story seems like ancient history now because it goes all the way back to 2008 with the economic recession. We were living in Las Vegas at the top of our careers, a few years from retirement, kind of living the American dream. And when that economic tsunami swept the globe, we lost our jobs, we lost our industries, our house lost 2/3 of its value, our investments were in free fall. It was a very bad situation for us.
Yeah, and we really weren't sure what to do. We were being told that by mainstream media that the correction was going to happen quickly, not to worry, but as time went on, we saw that that wasn't the case.
Yeah, we tried desperately to find jobs, but the only ones we could find were not even for half the money we were making. So we came to the realization after months of going through this that plan A wasn't working and we had to come up with some kind of plan B or things were not going to be good. In fact, the reality is, Michelle, that we realized because of our age, I was in my early 60s, in her late 50s, even if the economic boat were righted, we had lost so much so quickly that we honestly just didn't have time to make up lost ground. I suggested to Cynthia, you know what, I think we need to move someplace with a lower cost of living.
And I was all in on that. I said, yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense to me.
Then I said, I'm talking about moving to a different country. And her answer was a little bit different.
I said, what are we going to do? Honestly, in retirement, we thought we would travel and go see the world. But living in another country, that was just something that I wasn't prepared for.
Giving Cynthia credit, once we talked about it, we came to the conclusion that honestly, we didn't have a lot of options, and this seemed like the best one. But she said, all right, we cannot change our life totally just because of cost of living. We have to find a place that has other admirable qualities.
Well, Michelle, because we were talking about making our home somewhere else. And this is maybe a difference in a lot of people that decide maybe they want to go live abroad for a few years, have a big adventure. We were talking about really making our home somewhere else because we weren't going to have a home in the United States anymore.
We didn't make that what we called a wish list. And it included things like, well, in addition to the low cost of living,
Climate was huge. We've come to realize at that point in our lives, after living in Las Vegas, growing up in the South, we wanted a more temperate climate. We wanted a Goldilocks climate. We set out to try to find that.
Yeah, so we wanted that. We were thinking it would be great to have more of a pedestrian lifestyle. We had lived in Charleston for a few years, really enjoyed downtown Charleston. So we were able to walk a lot of places and thought that was great.
We were in good health, but we wanted access to good health care that we could afford. We wanted cultural amenities, which meant not living country life. We liked cities and we liked doing things and culture and all of that. My wish list, it wasn't that long, but it was very specific.
And I was tasked with finding that place. And through total happenstance on Memorial Day of 2009, I stumbled upon Cuenca, Ecuador. At that time, if you had shown us a blank map of South America and said, pinpoint where Ecuador is, and I'll give you $1,000.
We wouldn't have done it.
You would have kept $1,000. And we didn't even know how to pronounce Cuenca. We thought it was Suenza. Back then, it seems weird now with all the technology and social media and blah, blah, blah. But in those days, internet research wasn't that great. From what we saw, it looked like it checked all the boxes. So literally, from that Memorial Day in July, we were here on a 10-day scouting trip, which isn't really long enough, but that was kind of all we could afford, to be quite honest with you.
I was looking for all the reasons why we shouldn't do this. Not that I had a better idea, but that was my mindset when we came here. We have to go and check it out. And 10 days later, we got on the plane to go back to the States. And I said to Ed, I said, well, I guess we're moving to Cuenca, Ecuador. From that point forward, we kind of never looked back. I mean, it took us a year to unravel our life in the States before we were ready to show up here and start this life. It was something that we committed to. And that's another point I'd like to make. And then we can move on to some of your other questions. We committed to making this work at the highest level possible. We weren't looking at a lot of other options, and we weren't willing at that point to let go of our retirement dreams. And so that's what brought us here. And well, as they say, the rest is history.
What are some of the challenges you faced when you first moved to Ecuador? And what are the pluses? What makes it a great retirement destination?
We had really great intentions of learning more Spanish than we did before we got here. Just little things like unraveling your life and moving to a foreign country kept getting in the way. So we ended up arriving here with what we call Taco Bell level Spanish.
You can figure that out, right?
It's like ordering off the menu there, and literally thought we were going to perish. We were really pleased to find that the locals were both kind with any attempt to use their native language, and also they really enjoyed playing charades and hangman. So we did a lot of pantomiming and drawing those stickman pictures and all that kind of stuff in the beginning. We also learned that people spoke more English than we would have realized, that they're shy about it because it's not perfect. And it's kind of the same as when people try to learn Spanish here and they go to the classes and then never use it. But it didn't turn out to be the insurmountable obstacle that we thought it was going to be.
Well, and just to back up a second, when we were here on our scouting trip, we did connect with people that spoke English, an immigration attorney, a shipping agent, because we decided to ship a container of our belongings to Ecuador. We weren't willing just to show up with suitcases, and that was a challenge all in of itself because we failed to find a place to live. We didn't know exactly when we were coming back before we left our scouting trip. So that's a whole nother probably podcast is how all that happened. But one of the challenges is that we realized that we had to create this expat community along with a lot of other people that showed up around the same time that we did. It didn't exist here. And there were some expats here, but you wouldn't call that just a community of expats.
No, they were mainly expats that had maybe in the Peace Corps or something like that had married an Ecuadorian and kind of just faded into the woodwork. There was no network. There was no framework. It was stranger in strange land, really, because obviously the Cuencano community was fully functioning, but there was no expat sub-community of that.
So now fast forward to now, and we can talk a lot about the pluses. I know you want to know about that, but what makes Cuenca, Ecuador such a great retirement destination? And that has evolved over our time here. And it's really been very exciting. We had no idea that we were going to be participating in this. But gosh, Ed, rattle off some of the things that people do now to stay connected and to make this feel like a home they want to stay permanently.
When we first got here, there was one gringo night a week at a local bar downtown. And all of us that, because like Cynthia said, 2010 when we arrived was the first big influx of expats. International Living Magazine had touted Cuenca as one of the top destinations in the world. And so, boom, we all started showing up. But the only thing we had in common besides that was the fact we were standing in a bar with a drink in our hand. It has evolved from that to now we have 3 online bulletin board kind of things.
Daily publication and 1 monthly magazine.
That lets you know about everything going on. And everything going on ranges from specialty dinners at restaurants to bridge groups to community theater.
Charity volunteer work.
It just goes on and on, all that sort of thing.
English speaking churches. I mean, people came here and, oh, there's not a church here. Well, why don't we just start a church? And so that was why it was so exciting, because the people that came here, they were sort of industrious. And once we connected through, mainly it was email, most everybody, I guess, figured out how to get a phone then, but it was exciting to see all that evolve.
Other pluses, I mean, we mentioned why we came here, the low cost of living certainly turned out to be true. We have lived on our Social Security budget the whole time we've been here, and are in a position now where not only do we live an upscale lifestyle, I'm not bragging, but it's just the truth, we also are able to save money every month on a Social Security budget, which is unheard of in the States, obviously. That weather situation we were talking about, most of you guys in the US now are looking forward to spring. It's just starting to happen. It's spring for us every day. I was just out eating lunch on the terrace before we had this podcast. It's incredible. We've gotten so used to that.
So we've definitely found our Goldilocks climate here, and we go back to the States to visit our family, but we try to make those visits in the best time of the year, the spring and the fall, and avoid the extremes in temperature.
Ecuador uses the US dollar as their currency.
Yeah.
And as a counterpoint to that, we were in Argentina for those 2 months that I mentioned a couple of years ago. At that time, they've got this informal market of exchange where if the official rate is blah, 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 the blue market rate is that much plus. And at the time we were there, it was double. So if you brought $100 US bills, you got double what the local currency rate was.
And I think the reason you're pointing that out is because we got the timing just right on that. It's not the case now. And the expats that are living there, they have to deal with their purchasing power shrinking. And so when you transplant yourself to a country where you're having to constantly monitor the conversion rate for your money, it's just an added level of stress that we don't have here.
Yeah, because now in Argentina, instead of double, it's 20% more, which is a significant loss of purchasing power for people that are exchanging US money for local currency. So the US dollar really gives, plus our inflation, I mean, in 2021 there, you had that massive inflation in the States. Our broccoli goes from 70 to 75 cents a bunch. It's not that
it's not insurmountable. But yeah, so when we do visit family in the States, we have to be a little more careful with how we spend our money there, because it just doesn't go as far. Still, we make it work.
Today, who is the expat community in Ecuador composed of?
Well, today you see people from, many walks of life, from young families, from lots of different places, to Europeans that are working here, digital nomads, mostly retirees that have come here to live for the lower cost of living. In the beginning, it was mainly that, but now we see many, many different demographic groups of expats. The qualities, the attributes of the city, the country are there no matter your age or your walk of life.
And COVID opened up the remote work opportunities. I mean, we're on Zoom right now, and it's no longer necessary if you do all your work online that you have to stay rooted to a place. Somebody in the state that's making $120,000 a year and spending $100,000 to maintain the lifestyle, they could live here for $2,000 or $3,000 a month and bank the difference. And more younger families are catching on to that idea.
Well, and Ed, I do have to mention in the beginning, Michelle, it'll share with you the specifics about our internet connection. But of course, that's being able to work remotely depends on high-speed internet. And that happens so quickly here, but it wasn't the case in the beginning.
Our first internet service cost more than what we're paying today for dedicated fiber optic line, 200 megabytes. When we first got here, we were sharing a dial-up line, and it was 5 megabytes. So at night, you just couldn't ever be on the internet because
Yeah.
everybody was on Facebook for everything, and all you get was buffering. So that's come light years in the time we've been here.
So, yeah, technology has changed so many aspects of our world in general, but it has definitely changed the expat world.
So that's a challenge I hadn't thought of that we endured in the early days. It was hard to stay in touch with our family, kind of, because we used Skype mainly back then. That's going away at the end of this month. Sometimes that was just a total buffer. But that's who the expat population is now, mainly expat, North American expat retirees, but also now more foreign people and more younger people.
And where did you visit during your 2.5 years of travel? And how long did you spend in each location?
Post-COVID is when we did the 2.5 years. Like a lot of people during that lockdown period, we sort of did a reevaluation of our life. We'd been here 11 years and we kind of said, you know what? We're not getting any younger. If we're going to do this extensive traveling we've been talking about doing, we should do it.
Well, and the other thing is, we didn't have the financial resources because we were conserving them in the beginning of our expat life to scout a lot of different locations to pick out exactly the right one. I think we were really lucky that Cuenca worked out for us over the years because we write about top expat destinations. We wanted to go visit some of these places to make sure that what we were saying was really true, that you could live there on a Social Security budget. And so that was our goal, is to pick places where we knew that once we got there, that we weren't going to have to go into debt to stay there for longer than a few days or a long weekend.
Well, and also because we didn't do any scouting trips besides Cuenca. Yeah, we were maybe looking at the quote unquote next place for us. We've been here 11 years and you know, maybe there's a better place out there. So we started in Mexico because, as you may recall, Mexico was the only place that didn't close down during COVID. And even when COVID travel restrictions started being lifted, they were still very restrictive. So we went there for 2.5 months, going to Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Merida.
Yeah, we started off in Merida, and they have a great expat destination there.
Boy, is it hot.
We didn't know much about that location. It's on the Yucatan Peninsula. And it was really an interesting place to start our journey, I thought.
Yeah, so we did like the Merida, Tulum, Playa del Carmen, Cancun, San Miguel de Allende, and Lake Chapala, which is the top North American expat destination in Mexico. We weren't constantly on the road to brand new different places for the whole 2.5 years. We would intersperse those kind of chunks of time with going to visit our family in the States and honestly coming back here to Cuenca once in a while, because you might not think about it if you haven't done what we did, but it's really darn hard to just keep figuring out everything time after time after time after time. And sometimes we needed a mental break just to be familiar and not be a burden to our family when we needed some downtime.
Because we do manage a website, write a blog. We write about all of the things that we do to help other people learn about this expat life. So when you're doing the traveling, it's really hard to do the work. So we needed the downtime to actually do the writing and to take a break from, like Ed said, trying to figure out everything. And it's not that we were constantly doing tourist activities, but some of the places where we went, we wanted to familiarize ourselves with these locations that we hadn't visited before. So it required some of that touristy kind of stuff.
Yeah, so after that big first chunk and some downtime, we set out for Europe and we did Portugal, Spain, France, and England for 2.5 months. The first thing in Mexico and then the next chunk in Europe, we were staying approximately 2 weeks in each location that we stayed. It was hard to do all the things that we wanted to do in 2 weeks. If you think about it, when people vacation, it's like that's probably the longest they would be somewhere. But we weren't doing that. It wasn't just vacationing. So
we decided after that trip that the next locations we would spend at least a month. And we ended up spending
2 months.
2 months
in
several, in several locations, which was better.
Yeah, we went to Buenos Aires for 2 months and got to do Iguazu Falls while we were there, which was fantastic. And then we came back here a little bit and the States, and then we went
Colombia.
to Medellin, Colombia for 2 months, and that was great as well. And it was about that time that we decided, we need to get off the road. This is just thinking about the next place to put your head on a pillow for 2.5 years. It was great and we enjoyed every moment of it, but it was not sustainable.
Funny because we realized when we lost power in one of the places where we were, and we had committed to getting some work done, I said, "Oh, let's go in town and to this cafe that we had been to, and until the power comes back." And it was so funny because when we were there, this was in Mexico, I looked at it and I said, "I guess we're digital nomads." I mean, it just never dawned on me until that moment that that's the life that we were living on the road. And it was just kind of a funny realization.
Can you talk a bit about the master course you offer through your site, the Retirement Reimagined?
We made a lot of mistakes. None of them were insurmountable because here we are. But we realized that when we're having this life that we're having here, and we keep reading in the States about this financial disaster with baby boomers retiring and average savings being $80,000 or whatever, and goes on, that it just sounded terrible.
Or nothing.
Yeah.
$80,000. Many people had nothing saved for
So
retirement.
we just felt like we needed to create a program to shine a light on this possibility of expat life being an alternative to just having a miserable retirement in your home country. So what we did was for people that are interested in retiring abroad, but just kind of don't know exactly how to do it. And we've designed our course so it takes you basically all the way through from if you don't even have a passport, we instruct you on how to apply for a passport, all the way through step by step to getting off the plane in your new country and helping you get your new household set up. So it's very all inclusive. And we have a mini version of that, which is just the first couple of modules that gets you in the right mindset and gives you a good overview of what we think are the best expat countries to consider.
Michelle, I know just from taking a look at the website where these podcasts that you do live, there are other people that you talk to, and that's kind of your thing, that are living abroad. And I think that today there is so much information about that. Again, technology and people doing it and wanting to share their experience. And so that's a great thing. When we did this, there just was not a lot out there. And that's why we fumbled and bumbled our way through creating this life that we've created. And beyond our program, we write quite a bit about the experience of living in another country in retirement. And a lot of that on our website is free. Basically, we want to share as much about this as we can because during the time that we started this expat life, it wasn't being reported on, and it wasn't certainly being talked about as an option for retirement if you couldn't afford your retirement in the States.
What are some of the top retirement destinations and motivating factors for Americans looking to live abroad?
Let's go 3 per region. In Latin America, got to give a shout out for Ecuador, of course, because we're a little prejudiced, but it really is a great place to retire. Panama is a great one. They have an excellent pensionado program with lots of discounts for legal residents that are 65 and older. And Costa Rica has been out there for a long, long time. It's not the cheapest, but it's certainly not anywhere on par with the US as far as cost of living. In Europe, I would go right back to 3 of those 4 countries that we visited, which would be Portugal, Spain, and France. Certainly not Paris, but people are like, France? Amazingly, when you get out of that one huge metropolitan area that is expensive, there's no doubt. But even in the suburbs of Paris, we found, because that's where we stayed for 2 weeks, it wasn't that expensive. And in the Far East, I would go with Thailand, Philippines, and
Malaysia
or Cambodia, either one. Cambodia is kind of a under the radar place, but it's extremely inexpensive, and the expats there love it. Why don't you talk about the motivating factors?
Well, we've already talked some about the financial aspect of living abroad. I think that depends on your age group, what you're looking for. If you're a retiree, you definitely are looking for an expat community that you can connect with. And even if you're working for a company or a digital nomad, freelancer, whatever, you still want to try to connect with other people. So these expat communities are really important now. And it's easy to do this from right where you are. You don't have to pack up and move to do that. You can connect with groups. And in fact, that's what we did in our travels, connected with expat groups online before we ever showed up.
Something that wasn't really an issue when we did, but it's become increasingly an issue now is the political situation is so polarized in the States. And depending on who wins each time, the other side say, oh, I got to get out of here. So,
and then the other thing is just for the adventure. We've met a number of people recently that have come here because they've retired early, maybe they were teachers, and just looking for the adventure of doing something different. So that's a big motivator.
What are some common fears that those who are thinking about retiring abroad may have?
Well, before we talk about the most common fears, I will just say that because there's so much information out there on the internet, we have come across many people who fall victim to what we call analysis paralysis. They have these fears and they feel like if they just look at one more site, if they read one more blog, if they go on one more government advisory board, that they're going to get it all figured out. And what happens sometimes is that these people get so deep into the rabbit hole that they never end up doing anything. So that being said, we caution people to, yes, do your research and let us help you if you need help to figure this out, but don't go too deep that you can't ever escape that hole. So Ed, why don't you address some of those common fears?
Well, at some point you just have to pull the trigger. We already talked about the language thing. A lot of people concerned about, oh, at my age, I don't think I could learn another language. And that's a legitimate concern. But as we already mentioned, you can put yourself in a situation where you don't even have to learn the native language if you don't choose to, because there's such a vibrant expat community. Another one is the safety factor. Let's face it, wherever you live, there's crime. Wherever we live, there's crime. There's safety issues everywhere.
That's not location specific.
From an expat perspective, you just do common sense sort of thing. You don't go around flashing jewelry and walking around in a sketchy neighborhood with a pocket full of money at 2 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. But we also caution people, don't take what you read in the media at face value. And don't even take, Cynthia mentioned the U.S., whoever.
Government websites, that the State Department, they post advisories. And we know for a fact that some of these have just been wrong.
Well, yeah, and you'll read a news account about something going on in a country, and you don't know, but it's some kid sitting at a desk in wherever that's never even been to that country. They're just doing some online research like Cynthia was just talking about. A friend of ours a few months ago, lives in Pennsylvania, contacted me saying, I don't know why he was doing this, but he was on the Canada travel advisory thing, and they said something about Ecuador, and he wanted to make sure we were okay. And I'm like, no one, why are you on the Canadian whatever? We're fine. Yeah. So yeah, the safety thing is just, you got to do the research, and you don't want to go to a place where you know it's just crime infested, but who in the heck would do that to start with? Another fear is health care. What if I get sick or hurt, or Well, and
And
Medicare doesn't work outside of U.S. borders and all that sort of thing.
well, and these are things that we've had to deal with. Like I mentioned earlier, we were in good health when we decided to become expats, but we knew that we would eventually probably need some health care, and we wanted to make sure that it was available. So the interesting thing that we've discovered, again, because we talk a lot about and write about this whole idea of living in another country other than your home one, there are lots of sites out there that rank healthcare around the world. It's unfortunate that the US falls really behind a lot of other places in the world. And if you've never looked at that or never been interested, you would not know that.
Just about any major metropolitan area anywhere, quite honestly, in some cases, is going to be better than the States because there's not all the bureaucracy involved. If we needed a doctor's appointment, we just call our doctor on the phone and say, can we come by this afternoon? And he says, sure. We got his cell phone number.
Our experience with healthcare, I mean, this could be a whole podcast, has been a welcome relief to all the hoops you have to jump through in the States to actually get not specialized healthcare in the US, but just normal standard healthcare. And we know this from the accounts of our family and what they're dealing with. And they can't believe that we don't have to do any of that to get good healthcare here in Ecuador.
Right. One more on that, the old, what if it doesn't work out? I'm making that with a funny voice, but it's a legitimate concern because the reality is it doesn't always work out.
That's true.
We just say to people that have that concern, you know what, the worst thing that could happen is you go back where you came from. And in the meantime, you've learned something about yourself and hopefully you've had a great adventure. So it's not that big of a deal, but people just, they like feel like they're pushing all the chips to the center of the table. And that's rarely true unless you really, really have deep financial issues that are kind of forcing you to do it.
Well, even that, Ed, sometimes if the first place you go doesn't work out, maybe another expat destination would work out better for you. We have discovered in our time here and all the connections that we've made with people around the world that it's typical once you do this initially and you think, wow, I didn't perish. It worked out great, but I want to go be an expat in somewhere else in the world. And they do, and people move. And we've had a lot of people that we met here in Cuenca initially that are now living in Colombia and living in Argentina or living in Europe and Portugal. It opens up so many doors that initially you may not realize that you will walk through.
It's funny you mentioned that because in the travels we talked about earlier, we actually hooked up with people in Mexico, in Europe, in Argentina, in Colombia that we initially met here. And they moved on to other places. People leave here sometimes because they think it's a little too cool. I mean, it ranges from 70s to 50s every day, which we think is pretty fantastic. But some people want it to start with an 8 instead of a 7 or something.
That's right. So, Ed, what advice would we have for people to overcome these fears that are legitimate? We don't want to minimize them because if you're sitting in your living room in Iowa and you're thinking about doing this, know that you don't have enough money to have a good retirement. So how do you get over this?
I'll say this, if you live what we call a fear-based life, this actually may not work out for you in spite of all the reasons that it could, because as opposed to what you said earlier about us arriving here with the attitude, we're going to make this work at the highest possible level, no matter what.
Yeah, we had the glass half full, as the saying goes.
Yeah, and if you come here or anywhere half empty, looking for everything that's wrong with it, all your fears are going to come true. And other things that you hadn't even considered are going to, those boogeymen are everywhere.
I'm glad that you said that. But real things that people can do is like listen to these podcasts, right, Michelle? And do your online research. There's a lot of information out there. But at the end of the day, you have to make the decision, is this going to work for me? If you can say yes to that, after you've talked to enough people, connected with enough people, then you can start to really address those individual fears that you might have, like the language thing. Well, the technology, it's easy. If you don't know how to do it, somebody knows how. You can watch a video to learn how to communicate, how to use Translate. There are language classes all over the world that you can enroll in, and that's a great way to meet people. So there are many ways to overcome your fears, but identifying them and deciding that you will do that, that's the key, I think.
Yeah, it's just, even if you have some fears, know you're going to mess up, believe that you can overcome whatever you mess up, and go for it in spite of the fears.
How has living abroad and your time traveling changed you?
Wow.
You used to be so introverted. No.
Not really. That's a great question. I think that, especially based on that more than 2 years traveling full time, I think I've always known this. It kind of brought the idea to the forefront for me. I think travel always changes you. You may not understand exactly how at the time you're doing it, but being exposed to different ways of life, culture, language, I think for me, one of the biggest changes is understanding a culture that I didn't grow up in and coming to do that. And that takes time, and that takes a curiosity, really, of wanting to understand why these things are happening all around you that you don't understand. Well, you're never going to understand it unless you have enough curiosity to examine the culture you have transplanted yourself to.
Being that as it may, when you find yourself in this different culture, number one, it's really interesting to be a minority. We are white people, and it's not that we're discriminated against minority, but there's a lot more Latin American people here. There's maybe 5,000 gringos in a population of 600,000. So you don't see North Americans everywhere you go. So that hasn't been a problem, but
we came to recognize that. It's like, oh, we are the minority. It's not that it bothers us, really. We never thought of that going into it. That would be the place we find ourselves.
Yeah, but being in a different culture, to thrive, we have become a lot more tolerant of cultural differences. For instance, appointments.
Well, we love to talk about, we call it the mañana culture. And mañana, if you know any Spanish at all, you think that means tomorrow.
Mañana really means not now. It might mean tomorrow, it might mean next week, it might mean never, but it absolutely definitely means not now.
I don't think you can find that out if you look at Google Translate, which we use frequently. It won't tell you that. You only learn that by living here.
So you just have to go with the flow. I always say you got to go with the flow or you're going to go home, because I haven't met an expat yet that has single-handedly changed the culture of the country to which they have relocated. Another thing you have to be, and we have become, because everybody shows up with their North American brain, and it really hits a wall with some of the cultural things in a Latin American country. You have to be a lot more flexible and resourceful and find those assets deep within sometimes when you're mired down in some bureaucratic problem or something like that. And we have become that. And we've translated, when we go back to the States, we see everybody so, I don't know, just there's a different energy. And
it's really a stressful approach to life in general.
And we just kind of floating through, and our family's like, wow, you guys on some kind of medication? And it's not that, it's just that we have a different approach now.
Yeah, those are some interesting things that we have come to learn. And these aren't things that we knew to begin with. I think it just takes time for you to understand some of the things we're talking about.
And if you could have changed anything about your expat journey, what would it have been?
That's kind of a back to the future question. Because, if you change anything in the past, it alters the present. The truth of the matter is we showed up here hoping to survive because, as we described at the beginning of this conversation, we came here kind of beat down economically and psychologically, to tell you the truth. And over this 15 years, our present life has exceeded any expectation that we could have ever dreamed of. So, in that regard, I don't know. Like I said, we made mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that we didn't mess up in the beginning. I think I mentioned this before. That was part of the motivation of us creating a course to help people navigate this expat journey a little bit better than we did. It was nothing that we didn't feel like that we could get a solution for. So we were always looking for a solution when we did mess up. And if we couldn't find the solution, that's when we would connect with other people, get their help. And one of the things that I can really say, and we've emphasized connecting with the expat community, but also connecting with locals that you can communicate with. And from the very beginning, we had some very dear bilingual friends that helped us navigate many things when we didn't know what to do or how to do it. And that was invaluable, really. Maybe this is one thing we would change. When we mentioned that we shipped all of our belongings in a container, well, we didn't have an apartment at that time when we shipped our container. And when our agent called us and said, "Oh, I've got good news. Your container is going to be early," we said, "Oh, no, that's terrible news," because we didn't have an apartment. So the story ended with us getting the apartment, but we would never recommend that you do that. Ship a container when you have no place to put your things. So that wouldn't be something we would recommend.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, we've been going on and on about how great our life is and so forth and so on. But you know what, Michelle? This isn't for everyone. We're not urging every listener to this podcast to immediately go pack a suitcase and head for the airport and just look on the board and pick a place and go there. It's not for everyone. We mentioned the half empty people. I joke often that you can sell all your possessions and show up. We call them the suitcase people. Just show up with a couple of suitcases or whatever and start over. But you know what you can never get rid of? You. So if you've got whatever mentality, whatever attitudes toward life, you're going to bring them with you to the new place. And you really need to do a self-examination about that. Beyond that, there are people that have aging parents. They shouldn't be necessarily dragging their 85-year-old mom in bad health to another country. Have people that need to sell a business. It's not a one size fits all.
Well, and we didn't mention this earlier, but we didn't have grandchildren when we decided to move to Ecuador. We had 2 grown children at the time, and we thought that one day we might have grandchildren, but we would figure out how to make that work. And sure enough, we did. But sometimes that can delay your idea of when you're going to start your expat life. I know a couple we had dinner with, that's the case for them. Someone else that was planning on their scouting trip being last month here to Cuenca, well, they got the news that they have a grandbaby on the way, so they delayed their trip. And so lots of real life stuff happens. We encourage people to not let go of this. If this is a real dream that you have, or even if it's a necessity because of your financial situation, to not give up on this if you face obstacles that are delaying the whole process.
And that's the flip side of people that shouldn't be doing it. And Cynthia's right, the grandparent thing is huge. We've had friends here that a grandbaby showed up in the States and boom, they were out of here. That was more grandmama oriented. But
Yeah.
The flip side of the people that shouldn't do it, there are so many people, I don't want to say should because we don't think it's good to should on people, that should at least consider moving abroad as an option. Because when you're looking at what's the lesser of two evils, having a lousy retirement in the States for the rest of your life and just hand to mouth and yeah, or having the chutzpah to give it a shot, and it might work out like ours is. Where, like we said, on a Social Security budget, we're living a phenomenal lifestyle, saving money, able to travel.
One other thing, you said, yeah, we know this isn't for everybody. And in fact, we not too long ago wrote an article for Market Watch about the reasons why you should think about staying in America if that's where you currently live. And so we not only talk about how this expat lifestyle can address a lot of your issues, but also reasons why it wouldn't probably be good for you. And so we try to give a balanced view. And I know that that's not what everybody that's writing about this always does. And honestly, we have checklists and recommendations for the process of going through everything you have to go through to move abroad. But at the same time, we know this is not always a 1, 2, 3 linear process that you're going to go through. It's all over the place. Anyway, I think that's what we try to do, is get to know people and their circumstances. I think about one of the people that signed up for our program, and she's all over the place. I mean, she was going to come here.
And we told her not to.
And we said, based on knowing what we know about you, I don't think it's time for you to come here yet. She wanted to do all this traveling. And in fact, she listened. The next communication from her is, she said, oh, I decided I love Cuenca. I'll probably show up there eventually, but I'm going to go see the world before I do that. It made us so happy, really.
Yeah, she's been doing this house sitting thing, and she's all over the place.
So people get real creative if they just allow themselves to do that, because it's not a one size fits all. Most people are familiar with the term snowbird. Usually that's going to Florida or Arizona to escape your part of the world in the winter.
You go a couple hours further and have an adventure.
Yeah, they don't think about, oh, I could be an expat snowbird. That might be fun. That might be interesting. And there are ways to do that. So we give advice if you want to go down that path.
Thank you so very much for taking the time to chat today. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, we enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, we get real enthusiastic about talking about the choice that we've made to become expats. And we hope we inspire other people to at least think about it for themselves.
Yeah, I'd be ready to do it again, except we already did it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks a lot.
The American Citizens Abroad podcast is a monthly podcast that is published the second Tuesday of each month. It is edited and produced by me, Michelle, and is a product of American Citizens Abroad. You can email us at podcast@americansabroad.org. Remember, give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts so other Americans living abroad can find us. The content of ACA podcasts, including documents and presentations, is made available solely for general information purposes. It is not intended and should not be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of American Citizens Abroad, Inc., or any affiliated organization. ACA does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any content or other information. ACA disclaims all liability and responsibility arising from any reliance placed on any content or information by you or any other person. ACA is nonpartisan and does not support any political party or candidate.